Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on medical devices, cybersecurity. My name is Danny Lee, and I will be your moderator today. We have an informative session lined up to explore some common vulnerabilities, some regulation changes, and how to future-proof medical device against the ever-evolving security threats that we see today. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit your questions directly in the chat, and we'll address them during our Q&A sessions at the end. Let me get started by introducing our expert panels today. First, we have Stephen from Strike Graph, our very own Chief Strategy Officer. Then we have Chris from Privacy24. And lastly, we have Matthias from Red Sentry. As you can tell, Valentina is unable to join us today due to the hurricanes that's hitting the East Coast. We hope everyone's okay there. It would be great to get a quick intro from all of you. Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, thanks, Danny. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Farrell. I have been in the life science space for over 20 years. That time predominantly in IT and software compliance, about half of it in a medical device. So looking forward to today's discussion. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Stephen. Chris, just a quick intro from you as well.
Sure. Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Isham with Privacy24. Privacy24 provides data privacy compliance consulting and fractional data privacy officers. All of our clients are in life sciences, either pharma, clinical, or medical devices. Again, it's Chris Isham with Privacy24.
Thanks, Chris. And last but not least, Matthias, just a quick introduction from you as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so covering for Valentina that couldn't join us today, my name is Matthias Donet, kind of executive at Red Sentry. Red Sentry, we're a cybersecurity firm focusing on compliance-related security, specifically around penetration testing and vulnerability scanning, which means basically hacking companies before actual hackers can to show where they're vulnerable. So in the past year or so, medical devices have become a larger target to hackers, and cybersecurity posture is becoming a necessity. That's why we're here today, try to help break down the requirements and help people stay secure and compliant.
Thanks, Matthias. Cool. So why are we here today? Cybersecurity breaches in healthcare sectors have been particularly costly in the last couple of years. The average ransomware attack cost around $5.13 million to a typical company, and we're talking about kind of B2B SaaS in that space. But for healthcare companies, it can cost as high as $10.9 million for a single breach. There are also GDPR fines that we need to consider, which has resulted to close to $3 million in the last 6 months or so. Medical devices have been especially vulnerable due to factors like software unpatched, unsecure communication channels, and perhaps some legacy systems that are no longer supported. So how do we mitigate risks like that? That's what we want to talk about today with the two different partners of Strike Graph. But first, we want to address some of these recent regulatory changes that have been affecting the medical device, specifically in the European and North American market. Stephen, I am going to point this at you as our very first question. Can you walk us through some of the recent changes in EU regulatory requirements, as well as in US FDA requirements in the coming years?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing for us in the US is the FDA's update to the pre-market submissions guidance that occurred towards the end of last year. FDA guidances are typically not tied to legislative action. They have typically on there that they're non-binding. However, if you're in the industry, not following the FDA's guidance is never a particularly wise course of action. But what's interesting about the pre-market cybersecurity guidance is that it's tied to Section 524B of the FD&C Act. So this one actually has some legislative teeth. Essentially, what the FDA are expecting is that anybody who has an internet-connected medical device has a plan in place to monitor, to identify and address any post-market cybersecurity vulnerabilities and exploits. That during the actual design of the device, they make sure that not only do they have processes in place to support the ongoing maintenance from a cybersecurity perspective, but also that they have cybersecurity design elements included. As a part of that too, they're introducing the concept of software bill of materials. They call it CBOM, cyber bill of materials. But essentially, what they're requiring is that any component that you include in your SAMD or internet-connected medical device, that you have a full accounting of all of the suppliers and all of the different software applications and components that you're using to form your product. As far as the EU goes, they have quite a lot of guidance on medical devices and SAMD. Main focuses are patient safety and care quality. Folks have to comply with both the MDR and MDCG 2019, which is the discrete cybersecurity guidance from the EU for medical devices. Further to that, there is an emphasis not only on the design and the ongoing cybersecurity support of these platforms. There's also an emphasis on actually making sure that operators of these devices, inclusive of patients, have some level of security awareness training. So if a medical device has been used in a hospital, the expectation would be that the folks that are tied up using those devices are actually trained to have an awareness of potential security limitations or impacts to their use cases.
Thanks, Stephen. That's a great point on how unique some of these changes in the regulatory landscape have been changing rapidly. Companies must stay compliant in order to protect some of their business and patients, and we really appreciate your insight here. Now, for Chris, as a medical device company, and as you advise a lot of them, how can organizations stay focused around your cybersecurity efforts with so many different frameworks that are available today? And I'm going to post this question out to the audience as well. What are some of the frameworks that you're struggling with, and that if you have insight or experience with, while Chris talks about kind of his recommendation? We would love to see kind of what the questions are out there in the panel. Chris?
Sure, thanks, Danny. Now, the mistake that a lot of organizations make, especially startups, is they create a device without thinking about their regulatory obligations, and they assume that they can just get funding and go to market. Of course, everybody thinks about HIPAA, and they think about things such as the FDA requirements and what Stephen had discussed in the prior slide. But to assure compliance and to assure that your audience or your end users or the general public feels safe and that they can feel secure about utilizing your medical device, there are many other regulations that they may just be marketing pieces to a lot of people, but they can assure the safety, security, and privacy of the devices and the data that's being collected. And it's more than just, hey, I need that logo on my website. It's about building the processes and procedures into your devices. And a good way to go about that is to create a graph or a matrix with the regulations on one side and then the policies and procedures that are required going on the other side, and marry them up so that you can find one overarching way to kill two birds with one stone, or as we're talking about, several birds with one stone.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chris. It's very clear that aligning cybersecurity frameworks with sort of operational needs is definitely essential here for any company considering some sort of framework. But can you expand it a little bit on, like, for example, how do unique operational requirements of medical device impact specific cybersecurity measures?
Is that for me again?
Yeah, if that can be, Chris. Thanks.
Yes. Yes. Well, everything has a reaction and a chain reaction. So if you build in the security from the beginning with anonymization and what am I looking for? I just drew a blank, but
Stephen,
making sure that,
yeah.
that any data that's being transmitted is secure. And that shouldn't be an afterthought. That should be something from the very beginning. And that's what really relates to making sure that you hit these regulations, because every procedure and policy or everything that's required to become compliant is there for a reason. And it's there to assure that data being transmitted is being transmitted in the proper way, and that it's not just anonymized data or that it's secure. It's that nobody can get a hold of a packet and easily be able to be able to translate it to another person or to a human being.
Thanks, Chris. And Stephen, I'm going to pose this follow-up to you just from a software perspective. How does that help? And how does a software or some sort of organizational tool can help with the operations impacting medical device, especially around cybersecurity, Stephen, in your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question, Danny. So historically, the journey, and I was on that journey when I worked in device myself, the great focus is very much about designing a device, getting it to market, going through the submission process, and all the different regulatory hurdles to get there. Historically, one thing that we just didn't worry about was cybersecurity. We considered security certainly from a user perspective, as far as who could access data, who could modify certain configurations and that type of thing. But we, in the past, didn't have to worry about the Internet of Things quite as much. So now, if you are in the business of selling internet-connected medical devices, my recommendation certainly would be to look at software tools. Obviously, we have one, Danny, that's quite useful for this particular task. But look at tools to manage all the different aspects of expectation from the FDA, from the EU, to make sure that all the boxes are ticked. We did an exercise internally to look at the FDA's pre-market, post-market guidance and the EU's guidance, and essentially said, okay, if I was a medical device manufacturer and I had to line up with this, how many things do I have to worry about? And we came up with somewhere between 50 and 60 different things that a regulated company marketing a medical device would have to concern themselves with from a cybersecurity perspective. So, having a tool that is able to provide you that capability, I think, is really essential to do a meaningful management of it moving forward. I think too that the types of things that Matthias and Red Sentry do, again, it may not have been something we would have considered 10 years ago, but now are absolutely vital. Penetration testing and that type of thing, that can be really useful to do at different stages of the development and post-production life cycle.
Got it. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for sharing your experiences. Now, obviously, from what I'm hearing, balancing patient safety and privacy as well as security requirements seems to be a very thin balance between that. How do we do so around privacy, and how do we design that Chris, I'm going to pose this question to you as your resident privacy expert here. What are some of the challenges in privacy by design around certain frameworks?
Thanks, Dan. It's a good question. Privacy by design is about engineering and embedding privacy practices into your design from the very beginning instead of an afterthought. So things such as minimization or dual factor authentication, those should be thought of in the very beginning, not after you've already created what you're building or your software or your infrastructure. That's really what it's all about, and that's how you balance it. It's good to do if you want to be GDPR compliant or the CCPA or in Brazil's LGPD, but it's also the right thing to do. When you think about it, you think about dollars and cents. In the beginning, you may have to spend a little bit more. And it may be a little frustrating for some startups and smaller companies who just got their first $20 million and all they want to do is hire developers. But at the end of the day, you're going to spend a little now, or you're going to spend a lot more later trying to embed things as an afterthought. And I think if you spend the money on compliance up front, even before it's needed, you're going to spend a lot less in the beginning than you will at the end. And that's really the way you balance it. You have to think about it that if you're going to run a sprint or a marathon, and if you want to be around and if you want to be marketable down the road, these are things that are not just, as I said, required under regulations. These are the right things to do, and these are the things the general public wants. The court of public opinion can put you out of business a lot faster than the government.
That's totally understandable, Chris, and thank you for sharing some of your expertise in this space as well. Obviously, when you design any sort of privacy standard or any sort of cybersecurity framework, there's got to be testing required for something like this. Matthias, I'm going to pose this question to you as your resident expert here, and especially around penetration testing. So how does someone like the FDA require testing around these devices? And I'll have a follow-up question for you after that as well.
So regardless of the framework, cybersecurity requirements are usually a bit similar. So penetration testing is always something very bespoke and unique to every company. But the frameworks usually list a couple of different types that are recommended, such as external pen testing, wireless, and source code. So that means testing the device from the outside, testing how it communicates to the different application it works in tandem with, the software in the inside of the device itself, and also the hardware of the device. So, for example, you have devices that have certain ports. How could someone break in if it had access to the device itself? So those are some usual checks that the FDA will surely ask for, and that's the kind of test we usually come across the most for devices. That and continuous vulnerability scanning are usually good practices, and they are not very hard to implement if cybersecurity is taken into account through the whole life cycle of the device. So from its inception to end of life, wouldn't be that big of a deal. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And it sounds like there's a lot of different challenges when it comes to testing as well. Can you share some of those technical challenges, perhaps from both a customer's perspective as well as from someone that is testing on behalf of the customer?
Yeah, so I mean, there's challenges like through the whole process, figuring out the unique layout of that specific device, also getting the device to actually test it. So, for example, some devices might be super small, so shipping them to get the actual test done on it wouldn't be as difficult. But then you have to do a test on a medical kiosk that is 800 pounds. So how you ship that? So then you have to find the workarounds to actually test, for example, the virtual image of the software. So you can always check it that way. It's all about staying flexible and pivoting and figuring out the best way forward, but always taking cybersecurity into account. And as Chris said before, so you might need to spend a little bit more now, but you have more peace of mind and you ensure you will spend less in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of one of our listeners today. So I am a manufacturer in medical devices. How do I ensure that the software updates that I'm providing into these devices are secure, first of all, and does not introduce any vulnerabilities or any weak points into those devices as I provide these software updates? I'm going to go through this journey a little bit as the customer. Chris, I'm going to pose this question to you as first. As an advisor in the space, how would you introduce that to a customer that perhaps has not embarked this journey before?
Well, in the past, I've worked with a lot of clients and helped to engineer and build out their cloud hosting environments. And it's another one of those spend now, spend later scenarios. But having a dev environment that you can push updates through first is one of the most important things you can do. I mean, I've seen, we've all seen it. I mean, we've seen updates take down major multinational companies because they didn't push them through correctly. And that's the biggest suggestion is you push it through your dev or sandbox environment first, and you give it enough time to be thoroughly vetted and tested before you push it out to end users. And updates always have to be pushed out in a secure manner. And they can't leave vulnerabilities or open back doors because there's updates being pushed through.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Stephen, as we design a lot of these and testing up front, how does a software or some sort of platform help with this deploying the plan that perhaps has been drawn up by a consultant?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the obvious benefit is being able to, look at sort of each element of that consultant's plan as something that you have to prove to yourself and prove through your submission, and then, prove from a post-market surveillance perspective. So if you think of each of those items as a control, essentially, and then, think about how you would assign or identify the evidence that you've actually done it and that you've got ongoing processes to support the device in the field. I think that, that's where software can be really useful to provide a very ordered picture of how to get from A to B, as opposed to trying to interpret everything independently. We've polled different medical device consultants, and there's lots of great ones out there. This isn't meant as a slight or a comment more than just a fact, but when we really broke down with some of the folks, what are they doing for their customers that have internet connected devices, we didn't come across anyone who ticked all of the 50 boxes. Some were doing a handful of things, some were very focused on one specific area of the requirements. So I think just as a matter of course, being able to have that kind of top-down view of all the things you have to worry about can be extremely powerful for a company who's planning on having a device on the market or already has one out there.
Thanks, Stephen. And Matthias, last leg of that journey. How do we test? How do we ensure?
So to test, I'm gonna pick on what Chris said before. So I think the best idea, like when releasing new things, is test them out on a dev environment, make sure everything is properly vetted before doing the actual release. So just having a very comprehensive view of the device itself, how it communicates, how it stores information, just properly check it from all angles is important. So just making sure the software is up to date, there's proper encryption when communicating and transferring information, and having good security protocols in place are always just good measures.
Thank you for that. So now we've talked about how to ensure that your device, you got a plan going, right? Your device is now secure in the current stage. As we said at the beginning of this webinar, This is obviously an ever-evolving regulatory landscape, as well as there are constant threats being popped up on a daily basis. How do we future-proof this? What are some of the steps that can be taken in order for future-proofing medical device against the cybersecurity threats that are evolving over time? Stephen, I'm going to pose this to you just from a strategy standpoint. What would you recommend?
Danny, I think the hurricane's messing with my internet connection. I missed about the middle of your question there. Can you hit me one more time?
Of course. We're talking about future-proofing medical devices. As we talked at the beginning, that regulatory changes always happen over time. What are some of the steps and strategies that we can take as a medical device company or a life science company to ensure that what I'm putting in place now is evolving against the security threats that are coming in the future?
It's a couple of different things. I think one area I would look at would be the cybersecurity infrastructure, or the CISA website. You can go in there and actually break down healthcare vulnerabilities and incidents. It's a super, super useful tool. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's a mouthful, apologize. But if you go in there, you'll see a list of medical device companies and the different potential vulnerabilities and exploitations they have by the components of their software. So you can use that to sort of future-proof yourself a little bit to make sure that you're up to date on any elements of your particular application that might struggle. I think having a really good understanding of your SBOM, managing it electronically and dynamically to make sure that all of your suppliers are providing you with the best version of the software that you need. If components are being updated, that you have visibility to that so that you can avoid picking up somebody else's security flaws and introducing it into your platform. Ongoing risk management, really understanding when you make a change to your device, what the impact is, not all just the new functionality potentially, but the legacy functions, particularly as you're patching for security vulnerabilities, making sure that you don't then inadvertently break something as you do that. But yeah, I think on the whole, those are some pretty good places to start.
Are there any regulatory expansions that we're seeing in the current stage that we should have some of these companies consider, or they should think about how to address some of these new regulatory expansions?
I think just being very aware of that pre-market submissions guidance from the end of last year. We are very slow typically in the life science industry to recognize and adopt, and that does have some teeth. And there's a lot of alignment between what the FDA expects and what their EU counterparts expect. So I think just being kind of, up on that is important. I don't know, maybe Chris, I'm assuming there's additional privacy regulations popping up all the time that might be of note.
Yes, definitely. When I think about privacy and cybersecurity, I think about one coin with two sides. And the privacy is how we're going to handle the data and what we're going to do with it, and the cybersecurity is how we're going to protect that data. And when you think about cybersecurity and you think about how things happen, you can't ignore the human piece and the social engineering part. And that has to do with having the proper policies and procedures in place, and not just writing them in a document, but assuring that the people who are handling the data or creating the environments that hold the data are familiar enough with the policies and procedures that they know how to handle the data and they're trained properly. And that's the same with privacy. So, data handling, third parties, That's another big thing you have to think about is who are you
Mhm.
outsourcing different tasks to, and how are they being trained? Are they being trained on your policies and procedures correctly, so that there's not, the availability for somebody to send a phishing email to them and then get into the system? Um, we could probably do this for 6 hours because there's many lists of how people get data and how people break into systems. But, you know, privacy by design is a great way to assure that the data is minimized, for one, that, if you only need numbers and graphs, that's all you're collecting and holding, and that you don't need to hold social security numbers or EHR files or patient data.
Mhm.
You need to know that right from the beginning. And that will be helpful as well, so that if somebody does get in, that they're not getting anything.
Thanks, Chris. Unfortunately, we don't have 8 hours to go through today, but we'll make
Yes.
sure that the contact info is at the end of the webinar. So if someone is interested to chat with Chris, Stephen, or Matthias a little bit further in more detail, we can definitely do that as well. Well, we're kind of coming up to the end of the webinar. I want to make sure that people have some key takeaways for today. I'd like to, oh, there we go. Sweet. The slides are just popping up as I speak. Stephen, I'm going to pose this to you first. It's a couple of the key takeaways for our folks here today that have joined us, and then we'll go for Q&A at the end of this.
Yeah, sure. So key takeaways, folks. Cybersecurity risks in medical devices are growing. They require urgent attention. There is, an equal challenge for new devices as there is for legacy devices. Again, I encourage you to have a look at the CISA website, but maybe a month or two ago, Patient Monitor and a couple of other things from Baxter Welsh Allen were flagged as having potential vulnerabilities. So those are not new; those are legacy devices. Recent FDA regs, require those updated cybersecurity practices for compliance. Again, have a look at SBOM, make sure you understand that and you're managing it dynamically. A lot of folks will put it together in Word or Excel and, have it as part of, kind of a static piece of their design history file or their technical file, but do understand the requirements from an FDA perspective as far as how you have to submit that and manage that. Choosing the right frameworks to manage risk effectively while you are not required to go through a certification process. We would definitely recommend considering it if you have SEMDs in the field. It provides you with an additional layer of assurance and third-party certification that your cybersecurity practices are robust. And then finally, future-proofing. So just making sure that you understand the vulnerabilities in all your devices, both those that have been out for many years and those that are coming to the market. Matthias, Chris, anything you'd add to that?
Sure.
Yeah, go, Chris.
Oh, well, yep. Laws are changing all the time. New laws are being created. The EU has passed some AI legislation recently, which will definitely pass through to medical devices. So you're not just talking about HIPAA or GDPR, even though major fines have been levied for both of those. You're talking about other laws you have to keep up with. Right now, the U.S. has 19 or 20 states that have passed data privacy laws. California CCPA, which is a CPRA now, is the most stringent, but Maryland just passed one. It's very thorough. Unfortunately, it has no teeth, but there should be a national law. There's a bill in Congress right now. I know nothing will get done until after November and possibly till after January 20th, but it's coming. And in 2025, the U.S. will have a data privacy law. It may not take effect in 2025, but legislation will pass. So that's the future you have to think about. And if you're on top of it and you're ahead of the curve, you're going to build in your data privacy and your cybersecurity practices today.
Thanks, Chris. Matthias, go ahead.
Yeah, something I wanted to add. So my hacks and ransoms might sound very scary, but usually hackers go for the path of least resistance. So like outdated softwares, whenever they find something like that, or a weak encryption, or even like a default password, it's not like hacking sounds like a very convoluted space, but usually they look for the most like the easiest path forward. So just keeping up to date on those spaces can make devices a lot more secure while the different companies go through their compliance process and improve their cybersecurity measures. And so that's my opinion on like legacy devices. And for newer devices, just having cybersecurity in mind, like through the whole process of development, and ensuring you have a certain flexibility in place to be able to release updates quickly and be able to pivot if you find something and be able to fix that on the spot. I think that enables you to stay quite protected and future-proof yourself.
Thank you, Matthias. I want to open up Q&A for anyone that's on the call today. If you have any questions for our panels today, please feel free to post in the Q&A section. I'm going to start off with the first question. As AI and machine learning is becoming a hot topic around technology today, and obviously around cybersecurity, what are some of the things that we can do to ensure that AI and machine learning are being protected? And if we are a company that is adopting AI technology, how do we protect ourselves in going ahead and do so? Are there regulations, frameworks, testing methodology? I'm going to pose this to all three of you here.
Yeah, so as regards to testing methodologies, there's frameworks we can follow when testing language models and AI software. So yeah, there's already a lot of advancement in that area to kind of protect those AI models. So it's something very new for everyone, I think, development and security itself, but there's already protocols in place. So there's very good security checks one can follow to ensure its protection.
Thanks, Matthias. Stephen, Chris, anything to add?
I believe that in developing AI models, that you have to follow the same protocols. You have to think from the very beginning, what the end result is going to be, and what your desired end result, I mean, and how you're going to build in protection into that. And as Matthias was saying, there are protocols in place, and there are ways you can already do that. And they're not brand new. They're ways that have been used for a long time. AI might be a big buzzword now, but the technology behind AI has been around a long time. It's like privacy by design has been around since 1995. Everybody thinks everything is new, but it's not. So just be thorough and build it correctly.
Yeah, and to anyone interested in reading more about that, the OWASP Top 10 for large language models, so LLMs, is a great place to start looking at cyber risks. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to round that out, Danny, I've been working with ISP, the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineering, on a new AI guidance. We had the opportunity to meet with the FDA about 3 weeks ago to go over the draft. And one of the interesting things, for me anyway, out of that discussion, there was a lot of interesting things, was the desire to make sure that there was a very clear chapter on medical devices, which traditionally hasn't necessarily been the domain of ISPE. So that was an interesting thing that we brought up. And also a discrete chapter on cybersecurity. So this is something that, I think we're going to see more and more of. There is ISO 42001 out there, which is a great framework for laying out how to build a supportive process around your AI activities. And, I think, as Chris said, a lot of what's being done isn't new. But I do think we are going to have to adapt some of our thinking The kind of binary way of ones and zeros is changing because now ones can add themselves to each other and all kinds of weird things can happen. So, we will have to change our thinking, but a lot of the models that we've had in place for years and years haven't changed. And indeed, the regulatory frameworks like ISO 14971, 62304, they haven't changed. So, you still need to follow those regulatory expectations just with a slightly different mindset.
Thanks, Steve.
Just accept your AI overlord, Steve.
I have. Danny's my AI overlord. He's actually a hologram.
That's why I don't kill spiders. Just in case a spaceship full of spiders comes down here, they'll know I'm their friend.
That's a very good reason. Yeah,
that is actually a great reason. It reminds me of Men in Black, and I'm dating myself a little bit watching it for the first time in theaters when the cockroaches came out. And I can assure everyone, I am not AI. I am not part of Skynet. So I am a genuine human Canadian. Well, we're coming up to time here, and I appreciate our partners from Privacy24 and Red Sentry for joining us today to talk about kind of the security requirements and the ever-changing landscape around medical device and securing them. For those that could join us today, thank you for joining us. If you have any additional questions post-webinar, please feel free to reach out to Strike Graph, Red Sentry, or Privacy24. There'll be information coming after as a follow-up. And for the panels today, Chris, our strategic partner around consulting and data protection and DPO specifically for Strike Graph. Thank you for joining, as well as Matthias, Red Sentry, our pen test partners and vulnerability management and network security partner in this space as well. Thank you for joining and sharing your expertise. And then our very own Stephen Farrell, part of Strike Graph. We're the leader in customizable compliance management software that will ensure the continuity of these certifications and frameworks for our joint customers. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.